All right, let's get started. I want to welcome everyone. Um, Thank you for joining our webinar today. This will be the final webinar for the calendar year. And today's webinar will be managing 1099s in SAP Business One. Next slide, please, Maggie. Okay. For those of you who've been on our webinars, you know me. I'll introduce myself very shortly. But on the call today is David Snyder, and he is our practice director. He runs our whole Business One practice, as well as Maggie Fernandez. And Maggie will be doing the presenting today. She'll be doing all the heavy lifting today. Official title is Customer Success Director, but does a lot more. And myself, Livio Scrignoli, and I am the sales director, the SAP Business One sales director for Phoenix Business Consulting. Okay, who is Phoenix? We are a global company. We have offices around the world. We've been in business for 25 plus years. We do only Business One and only SAP products, and I will talk about the SAP products in my next slide. We have 200 plus employees now, and the important part about the 200 plus employees is most of our focus is in the U.S. for this call a good portion for Business One, but our employees are not only IT driven, IS driven, software driven, but they are industry driven as well. They've been in the industry for many years, so we have senior consultants. Okay. Maggie, next slide. As I said earlier, we're an SAP house, and we sell and implement many SAP products. For this webinar, mostly SAP Business One is the importance, but we do S4HANA, we have analytics, we have Ariba, we have Concur, Signavio, and Success Factors. Okay. We also have our own IP, and we've had some webinars on our own IP, but if anybody's interested, you can reach out to me. We have intercompany, e-commerce shipping. We have a shipping product that does rate shipping, and I think we featured that on 2 webinars right now. An e-signature, credit card integration, expense management, and invoice integration. Thank you. Okay, what we will be talking about today is 1099s. We'll start with the 1099 setup in SAP Business One. Then Maggie will go over some of the 1099 reports. Okay. We will talk about 1099 forms, and obviously we'll stop for Q&A at the end, but we'll probably handle Q&A during the call as well. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll receive a link to today's presentation, and so no need to take notes. Please put your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we will answer them throughout and at the end of the webinar, whenever it makes sense. If we do not get all of your questions, please fire an email off to me. You'll have my contact information, or we'll happy to stay after the call, time permitted. And you'll receive a link to future webinars. It will be all in the next calendar year, 2025, but you will also receive a link to all the future webinars. Okay, Maggie?
All right.
And here's my contact information, which you will be receiving.
Perfect.
All right, Maggie.
Thanks, Livio. All right, I'm just gonna stop sharing for 1 second so I can switch to my SAP screen. In 1 second to reshare the screen. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So thank you, Livio. I'm Maggie Fernandez, as Livio mentioned, and today I'll be demonstrating the 1099 functionality in SAP Business One. As always, we recommend that you consult with your accountant related to your specific requirements for submitting any forms to the IRS. This demonstration will be going over the 1099, which is an IRS form. However, the specific setup for your needs may be different. So make sure that you review those with your accountant. Any forms or layouts in the for 1099 in SAP in your specific version of SAP may be outdated from the current requirements. As you well know, IRS is constantly changing forms and requirements every year. So especially if you have an older version of SAP, you may need to make some configuration changes to the forms and the boxes within the forms to make sure that the layouts are configured properly. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the demonstration. So I'm going to start off with the setup of how to set up 1099s in SAP Business One. The first thing you'll do would be navigate to the administration, setup, financials, and the 1099 table. SAP does give you some predefined forms that are on this list, keeping in mind that the requirements do change. So you can always go in here and reconfigure them. So 1099 miscellaneous is probably the most common ones you guys will use on a regular basis. If you double click on any of the rows, it then opens up the configuration for each form with all of the boxes that you have on the form and the box description. And this table also allows you to set up the minimums for the different, reporting requirements here. So you might, these change, so make sure that you confirm what those minimums are, but you're able to spend or pay vendors to a certain minimum that doesn't require filing with the IRS. But once you go above that minimum, then you're required to submit a 1099 form. So you can define what those minimums are, and that you should do with your accountant for the current year when you're setting them up. Okay. Next, the other thing that you would set up on the business partner master is once you have your forms defined, you have to assign the appropriate form and the appropriate box of where you want to put the vendor's totals into. So where you would do that is just in your regular business partner master for your vendors. I'm going to pick up one of the vendors that I know is already configured here. This laser com, where you would define this is in your accounting tab. There are two fields, 1099 form and 1099 box. The options in these drop downs are driven by that 1099 table that we set up, the first step that we did. And you can always define new if a new one is required. It just takes you right back to that table that we saw initially, and you can add more as needed. Or you can assign one of the predefined ones, and then here's where you would define based on what you're spending with that vendor, what it's for. You would have to determine where is that amount going to be listed in the form. So you would set that up at the vendor master level. You'd have to go through your vendors, what you're spending on, what those minimums are, and define which ones of your vendors need to be defined in the system. All right, so those are the two initial things that you would do in setting up your 1099s. Once you have defined the forms, the boxes, and then assigned those appropriately to your vendors, going forward from that moment forward, any new AP invoice transactions you create will default to whatever you've assigned to that vendor. So the next step I want to do is I want to show you on the AP invoice here. I'm going to pick that same vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and start creating an AP invoice for LaserCom. And I'm going to see that in the accounting tab, it has already appropriately defaulted to what I have picked on their vendor master. So once you define those in the system, keep in mind, it doesn't go retroactive to everything that you, any transactions you already have in the system. It will assign these two things on the transactions from this point forward. So if you're in the middle of the year and you want to do 1099s by the end of the year, how do you achieve that? Well, that's the next step in the setup of the process. So if it's in the middle of the year, once you define it, or maybe you set up a vendor a month ago and it was forgotten to assign those things, and there's been a few transactions already on that vendor, so that could happen as well. You could then go to opening balances and assign the opening balance for what you want on the 1099s added to those vendors. So that can be accomplished. If you go to the administration system initialization and opening balances and 1099 opening balances. And here you can specify a specific vendor, or if you run it wide open, it would give you any vendors that you have assigned the 1099 form and the 1099 box within their master data. So it's not going to give you all vendors. It's only going to bring up vendors where you have defined that there needs to be a form and a box. And if you are going to create an opening balance, you can just put the posting date and then define what that opening balance is. Maybe you didn't do this at the beginning of the year, but you want to be able to do 1099s for the current year. You would have to complete with the opening balances at the time that you do the configuration, so that going forward, your new transactions will be posted correctly, but you could still accomplish the year by putting in these opening balances. This process is only done one time, and it's usually at the setup of the vendor if you've had any transactions that weren't recorded correctly. All right. Okay, so we've talked about the functionality of the setup, opening balances. There's one other area of general setup information, and that is under financials. You could do 1099 editing for transactions as they're happening. So if you have, there's two different ways that you can edit 1099 data. You can edit any AP invoices that are open. I'm going to run it wide open to see if there's any in there, and there is one. So there's one for LaserCom, and it has what the assigned form and box are. This gives you the ability, like if you had a lot that you had to update, you can do it in bulk, or you can always adjust this on the invoice if you needed to in the accounting tab. As long as the invoice is not paid, it's still an open invoice. You can adjust these fields here or here. Once the invoice is paid, you can't make an adjustment to those fields anymore. You can also run this report for editing. I'm going to go ahead and run this. This tells you what the 1099 amount is per transaction. And it allows you to adjust the transaction amount, or the 1099 amount for a specific transaction. I guess a good example of that would be if you had a transaction, because the assignment of this is at a global header level of all the transactions. You can't pick and choose at the line level. So this allows you that if, let's say, you didn't want to include this $300 as part of this because it's really for what was spent, it doesn't need to be in the number for the 1099. You can make then that manual adjustment to the transaction. It's not likely you would do those adjustments, but it does give you the option. So if your accountant's reviewing your numbers and they're like, for this particular spend, a portion of this shouldn't be on the 1099, then this is where you would adjust those numbers. Okay, so I've covered all of the setup and information around setup. Now I'm going to go into reporting. So if you go into financials, I'm sorry, is there a question?
No, I'm just reminding the attendees, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. Thank you very much. Carry on, Maggie.
All right, thank you, Livio. All right, so financials, under the financial reports and accounting, there is also a 1099, 1096 report. So here you have the 1099 vendor summary report. There's 4 reports you can run through here. 2 of them are really more reports, and then these 2 are the forms. So let's start with the first one. This is just a summary report at the vendor level. So by vendor, you can see what their data is as far as their tax ID, the form and the box that are assigned to them, and then the total payments, and then the 1099 payments. This would give you visibility of, hey, our total payments to this vendor was, 2,000, but maybe if you made an adjustment on the edit screen that we were on before, where you reduce that, you would be able to see that, oh, total payments are X, but the payments that are affecting or need to be on the 1099 is this. So it'll give you that visibility. If there is any editing that you do, you can see this on the vendor summary report. Okay. On the 1099 summary for form and box report, this just kind of groups it by the form. So it's all the same data. It's just grouped by the types of forms that you have predefined. So if you had the 1099 and EC and you had vendors assigned to those, then you would see it. And also what's important to notice here is that you can change this based off of what your data, the data that you're running. If you wanted to run the current year, you would do this in January for the current year if you had any data in there. Also, in the selection criteria, you have to pick which form you want to run the report for, and you can also specify the boxes. You can choose them all if you want to for the reporting. Let's see if it returns any data here. It didn't return any data. Oh, also this radio button here shows what has not been submitted. If you want to show submitted, then it should turn some data. I need to pick the right date. There we go. I knew there was transactions in there. All right. So what this means here is show not submitted versus show submitted. So for 1099, so when you go to this 1099 form, we're going to do this next, and you go to run it. When you go to print, once the data comes up and you go to print it, it's going to ask you if this is the formal submission. And then the transactions will be tagged as, instead of not submitted, they'll be moved to submitted. And so that's the difference. So when you go to print those 1099 forms, you'll actually get a pop-up. You'll see that in just a minute. And that's the difference between these two. All right, as far as the summary, again, it looks exactly all the same information that you had in the other document, in the other reports. Okay. Now, if you wanted to run the 1099 form, which would be like the next thing, you do this in January, I believe the cutoff for reporting it to the IRS is January 31st. You would have the 1099 forms. You select here which forms you want to run and what boxes. You can exclude some things. Well, I want to make a mention of one particular one. This line item 7, non-employee compensation. The IRS used to include this as part of the miscellaneous form. It used to be a separate box on the miscellaneous form. A few years ago, IRS changed it to its own form, which is the NEC, the non-employee compensation form. So it's a 1099, but it's a 1099-NEC, or sorry, NEC, as opposed to the miscellaneous form. So I run that. Oops. Give me a second. I'm going to run it for 1099 form and ran the date range. Let's see what it says. Okay, so once you get the form, the 1099 form printing, you get a summary first of what's going to print, and then you would go to preview the layout, or you can print the layout. The layout in your particular SAP version may need to be reconfigured or updated, depending on the version, just to make sure that it's aligned with the current form from IRS. But you can view it here by going to the preview. You see, this is pretty much all just the information. The form you would have comes from the IRS, right? So I could believe you can print those off from the IRS website, and then you would just need to test printing them to make sure that they align with the boxes correctly. And if I have, here's an example of the 1099 miscellaneous. That was a revision from January 24 of 2024 this year. This is the layout. So when you look at the SAP, all of this information should fit within the boxes. And if it doesn't, it just needs to be reconfigured, just specific to your environment, what the latest update you have in your environment for that too. So there may need to be some tweaks for your particular forms, but that's something that you can easily submit a ticket to our B1 support@phoenixteam.com, and our team would be able to assist you with those requests. All right, so that's the 1099 form. There is another form for 1096 as well in there that you can also run from here. And if there's anything that you have to submit, it would be in there as well. Okay, are there any questions at this point? I think it's a good stopping point. I've gone over a lot of information so far. Just want to make sure if there are any questions that I can answer them for you.
No questions right now.
Okay. So one of the common questions might be, well, you know, how do I know, how do I know if I need to report? I'm gonna go to the business partners and look up I'm gonna go to the business partners. I'm gonna do a wildcard search here. And I created a view here that shows me which vendors have the 1099 box filled out versus which ones have the form code. So, you know, you can see from this that not every vendor is set up with the 1099 information. This is a demo environment. So, you know, when we set it up for demos, we don't do it for all vendors, but this is something that you would review with your accountant to make sure, is this the type of vendor that I need to fill this 1099 form out for? And then you would make sure that you're filling it out correctly. You're updating their business partner with those two fields so that you could then start generating transactions that have this data on it. And then your reports for the 1099 reporting would be filled out. So it's just a good exercise. Now is a great time of year to do this exercise to make sure that you're preparing your system for next year to capture all transactions correctly. You still have the ability to create opening balances for the ones that you maybe want to do 1099s for this year. You can do it if you have not set up your system with this configuration. This is something that you can do now but you would have to put opening balances if you haven't configured it before. And we have a team of consultants that would be happy to help you with that if you need support. If we do have some documentation that we'll provide as well as part of this, and this video recording as well. That's one kind of question we get about, like, how do I know if if I need to do it? You need to check with your accountant specifically about which vendors require it, what are the minimums for the IRS, so that you get it set up correctly. Any other questions at this point, Livio?
No questions, Maggie.
All right. Well, I think we're just about at time, so there's no other questions, then I think this is a good stopping point.
Any further questions? No questions.